Hi all, welcome to the first of what's going to be two videos looking at the management of climate change. Now, I've decided to split this one up into two just as we get going through it. There's one of these sections we're going to look at the end, the action steps, the specific actions that the UK is taking against climate change is expansive enough to deserve looking at its own video. But to outline a wee bit of structure of what we're going to be looking at over the next two videos, there's a variety of different things that we talk about in terms of methods of managing climate change. Now, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about different global agreements that have been reached to try and to deal with climate change. We'll spend some time looking at carbon trading, offsetting and carbon taxes. Now, these can all kind of be lumped together in that they are all focusing on trying to deal with minimising the volume of carbon that we have in the atmosphere. Then we've got geoengineering, which can be split down into two main areas: the removal of carbon dioxide and the management of solar radiation. And then, as I say in the second video, we're going to look at some of the different action points that the UK is taking to tackle climate change on its own. Now, to get started with worldwide agreements, there have been a number of different worldwide agreements. There's been a variety of summits and protocols reached. So I've got a list at the side that you can see. These are just some dates of a few of the times that world governments and leaders have got together to discuss climate change. And there's a general consensus now across the world that climate change is a major issue. And that things need to be done. And countries are consistently pledging to take different steps, and they're setting different targets on reductions of emissions and improvements that they want to make. And, there are a variety of plans that different nations are setting out, some of which we are going to be discussing in more detail in these videos. However, one of the big things when it comes down to this is a lot of these agreements aren't legally binding. And in particular, historically, there have been a lot of issues with getting some of the big players, particularly the United States, to buy into applying some of the agreements rigorously. And because of that, they can have a limited effect. But they are important in that they do raise a lot of awareness of what these issues are, and that you do have some action or some unified actions being taken globally. Now, when we start to get into the kind of dealing with carbon specifically, as I say, there's a number of different things that we look at. The first one that I wanted to talk about was carbon trading. Now, the key notion here is you treat carbon as a commodity. So different companies, different countries can buy or sell the right to create more carbon. So if you're a country that has got a programme, and it's the kinds of programmes we're going to talk about later, like afforestation, you could sell the carbon that rainforest you're going to plant is going to take in to a company that wants to create a lot of carbon. Now, there's a big advantage to that, is that it allows the country doing the selling to make money, and particularly in this case, we'd potentially be talking about developing nations, and it gets something out of the fact that some pollution is going to be created. Now, this is fairly widely criticised. The big thing we're talking about here is that developed companies, developed countries have got a huge advantage because they've got the disposable income to just buy away this problem. And that links into the second big criticism. This doesn't promote change. It doesn't promote the idea that you need to change what you're doing. It just promotes the idea that you can buy the right to be as polluting as you want to be. As long as you're willing to pay a penalty, then it's fine. Now, carbon offsetting is similar in that it is companies or nations investing in environmentally friendly programs to offset the amount of carbon that they produce. Now, there's a variety of different key schemes that we look at here. Now, here's some of the kind of four that we're going to focus on. So we look at renewables, just generally renewables. Great idea in that, it provides non-carbon based power, which is fantastic. But it's only effective if you tail off your coal and gas, etc. power generation as well. And dependent what type of renewable energy you're looking at, they can have detrimental effect on reasonably delicate ecosystems, and we'll talk more about that later on in the video. Afforestation, or dealing with forestry, I mentioned earlier very briefly, just the pure idea of if you plant some trees, these trees are going to act as a carbon store, a carbon sink, and that means that you're taking some carbon out of the atmosphere, which is obviously a good thing. Again, issues with this: the impact is slow. You need to wait until the tree's growing. to really get the peak of what they're going to take in out of the atmosphere is carbon. And most artificial forestry, it's monoculture, it's forestry like you think of seeing forestry, where it's all the same type of tree, and that can have a negative impact on ecosystems as well. Now again, we could look at just trying to make things more energy efficient, reduce the need for fossil fuels. It's a very, very powerful argument. And again, this is something that is a really good idea. The downside to it is, again, it doesn't encourage change. It doesn't encourage people to look at how they use energy and their relationship with energy and address it. It just says, again, okay, we're going to give you more energy efficient bulbs. So rather than remember to turn the light off, it doesn't matter if you turn the light on, it's more energy efficient, so it's not going to be as bad. There are good things to this, but again, we're really looking to try and promote changing people's attitudes more than anything else. And the last one we've got here in this little part, destroy byproducts of different processes that could then go on to emit greenhouse gases later on in their life, maybe when they're in landfill or something like that. Now, this, again, is not a bad idea. You're taking things that are already going to be produced and you're trying to deal with the problem that you've already made, which is obviously something that's very, very beneficial. But we come back to this idea of just paying the problem away from earlier. You've got some companies will use these to try and gain themselves like brownie points, and they'll say, look at how good we are, look at how environmentally, ecologically responsible we're being, but they don't actually change any of their business practices, so they're still creating the byproduct that needs to be dealt with, rather than trying to stop creating the damaging thing in the first place. Now, the next one, carbon taxing is very, very straightforward. Put a tax on the generation of energy via traditional means. So literally tax it. Make it more expensive because you put a premium on it. And there's schemes to do this, and funny enough, they are all renewable schemes. This is the big thing that I mentioned earlier. Renewables are a fantastic way to try and deal with the amount of carbon that we create, but we need to be mindful that we tailor off the amount of traditional energy that we're creating via fossil fuels. So we're going to talk through the different types of renewable energy and kind of some of the pros and cons with these. So solar power, right, fantastic. It can be used big scale and small scale. You will all know somebody who has got solar panels in their house, or you will pass a house that has solar panels on it. And you can go from that to covering fields in solar panels to generate energy in a larger way. There are big concerns about habitat loss with large farms, because you are literally putting huge areas of the countryside more often than not in shade, which is problematic for the environment. And the land can't be dual used, and that's unlike wind power. But with wind power, and I don't actually have this on the slide, you can dual use an area you've put aside as a wind farm. You've got the pylons up, yep, they're doing their thing, they're generating some energy. A huge plus is the technology for these things is becoming a lot cheaper, and it's getting better every day. But around that land you can do other stuff. It's very common to find that it's being used for sheep farming, for instance. The downsides, generation of energy in wind power is reasonably low compared to other methods of energy generation. There are concerns about how it looks visually. And ecologically, it is a problem. You do have issues with bird strike, and then you've also got issues with the construction and the putting the turbines and the pylons in place does have an ecological impact. Geothermal power. Now, everywhere on the earth can practice geothermal power. Yes, some areas, Iceland, we're looking at you, have an easier job of implementing geothermal power, but the engineering, the technology exists to put this in anywhere, and the technology exists to hide these plants from view, so you don't have those issues with kind of visual appeal and stuff like that. However, it's expensive. Doing this, particularly if you are in an area that is not Iceland, and particularly conducive to putting in geothermal power, it can be expensive to do it, and in extreme, and I really, really put emphasis on the word extreme, circumstances, they have been shown to link to earthquakes as well. Now, biomass plants, the great thing with biomass, the fuel is there, it's cheap, it's readily available. You can be looking at manure, it's certainly one way to do it. Also can be looking at things like waste from oilseed rape and things like that, which has other benefits that you could add in as well. And there's a typo on the slide, so I'll ask you to forgive me. But the downside to biomass is that if you're not using crops, it's not really renewable if you're not replanting what you're going to use to do it. And you do have instances where you can produce reasonably large quantities of methane, which, as we've discussed in previous videos, is a very potent greenhouse gas. Now, some of the other things that we can look at here, hydroelectric power, it is well understood, it is well implemented, it's reliable, it's efficient, it is, as a rule, brilliant. But it needs a ton of cement, literally tons upon tons of it. And that's problematic. That is a big contributor to global climate change. The creation of cement is a very, very polluting process. We add into that the construction of these areas is expensive and dependent on the bit of land you're electing to flood to put the dam in, you can ruin land, and it's fairly common that land would be reasonably, potentially useful agricultural land. Now, wave power is good because, it's a nice consistent source of energy. The waves never go away. And it is becoming a lot cheaper to put in place. Now, obviously, it's useless if you are landlocked. So if you are Mongolia, wave power is of very little use to you. It can interfere with shipping routes depending on where you put the generators for the energy. And again, there are ecological impacts to this. If you're putting them in the seabed in particular, it can be problematic for life down there. Tidal power, much more predictable than wind and solar, but again, and I've just put it in as one word for the next two, just because we get the idea, cement. If you are going to be putting in tidal barriers, for instance, like they have at the Thames, now that's going to be problematic in terms of it's a huge amount of cement needed to build it, and that has an ecological impact as well because of where you're going to build it. Now the last one, while it's not strictly renewable energy, it certainly bears discussion at this point, nuclear power. Now again, very well known, well understood, already in use to provide large-scale energy. You only need to look at France, for instance, to see areas where there's a lot of nuclear energy utilised. Huge amount of cement when you're building it. Building nuclear reactors is very, very expensive, as is decommissioning them. You're going to create nuclear waste, which is really difficult to deal with. And if it goes bad, it can go really bad. As unlikely as it is to happen, it is still a potential concern. Now, with geoengineering, I say there's two things we're going to look at. Carbon dioxide removal and solar radiation management. Now, carbon dioxide removal, there's a couple of different things that we can do here. You create biosinks by planting trees. We talked about this again. We talked about this earlier, sorry. You plant trees, they take in carbon dioxide, takes it out of the atmosphere. You can look at, creating artificial trees to do this process as well. You can capture carbon from the industrial process. Again, it's similar to what we were talking about earlier. You then take that carbon and you try and store it underground in geological formations just to get it out of the way for a long, long time. If you enhance weathering, you can take, pardon me guys, you can take some nutrients out of the land, and you can try and get that into the atmosphere, and they will take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as a result. If you use iron to fertilise the top kind of layers of the ocean, it can create phytoplankton, or encourage the growth of phytoplankton, which will take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And last, scrubbing towers are really what you think they're going to be. These are huge towers that you try and force air through via turbines, and then you've got a chemical reaction that's going to go on in there that's going to remove carbon from that air. Now, solar radiation management, this is literally try and deflect solar energy back into space. Now, there are different ways of doing this, and some of these seem really, really out there, but they are all practiced, I promise. If you spray sulfates into the atmosphere in aerosol form, it makes the atmosphere more reflective. It makes it more willing to reflect energy back. If we put silver iodine and things like that into the atmosphere, it creates clouds. And you can make clouds grow, and if we think all the way back to talking about atmosphere, we know that if you've got more clouds in the atmosphere, it encourages the reflective nature of the atmosphere as well. If we start to change how we plant crops and we plant more reflective crops, that again is going to increase the Earth's albedo effect, as would paint roads white, paint buildings white, paint pavements white, paint them with reflective material that is going to encourage the reflection of solar energy back into space. All of these things will encourage energy to leave the Earth and hopefully help deal with climate change at least a bit. Now, I'm going to wrap this one up there, guys. We're just about out of time anyway. In the next video, we're going to look at some of the specific action against climate change that's been taken in the UK. And until then, I'll speak to you guys later.